race for governor in Virginia. It's an interesting one. It's in its final stretch with just 2 weeks to go before Election Day. Former governor and Democratic candidate Terry McAuliffe and Republican nominee Glenn Youngkin have clashed on several issues related to schools, from charter schools to vaccine mandates for teachers and students. So Stephen Farnsworth is here with me now. He's a professor of political science and international affairs. He's also the director of the Center for Leadership and Media Studies at the University of Mary Washington. So glad that you are here. So we've been talking on and off about this race kind of from the very beginning when we started to see, who was kind of being separated from the pack. And we've been having ongoing conversations. I'm interested in why certain topics have kind of risen to the surface here. Schools have become one of the largest battlegrounds in Virginia. How is this topic influencing the election?
Well, this is a race that is very much in the margin of error, one of these too close to call contests. And what you see here is very much an appeal to the ideological base of both sides. The image that the Democratic candidates around the state are trying to present is that the business of the schools is under threat by extremists who want to create a very different educational system than what exists right now. And on the Republican side, there is this idea that there is a liberal left agenda that is out there. Critical race theory is an important part of the Republican narrative right now, even though critical race theory isn't taught in Virginia schools. And so you have very much an appeal to the extremes of both sides to build out turnout. It's not an appeal to the center at all.
These races get so expensive, especially when the whole country's watching. An analysis by the Virginia Public Access Project found that McAuliffe raised more than $12 million last month, while Youngkin only brought in a little over $7 million. Now, Youngkin is a wealthy man himself, and he had put a lot of money into his own campaign earlier on. What could be fueling, though, the surge, and what does it mean for the two candidates?
Well, there's very much a dynamic in Virginia governor's race the year after a presidential election that it is a sort of a midterm grade on a president, how an early indication of how the midterms and the congressional elections next year will turn out. And so Virginia is seen as this leading political indicator, regardless of a particular cycle, who's in office at the White House or not. And so as a result of these kind of dynamics, both parties are all in on the Virginia governor's race. It has a huge national impact in terms of the bragging rights of these two campaigns and the two parties going into the midterms. We're looking at probably the first $100 million Virginia governor's race. It's really striking. And with the way that our financing system works within Virginia, candidates can drop all kinds of money into this race at the last minute. And so even though Terry McAuliffe, the Democrat, has the advantage right now in terms of the money he's received lately and in terms of the total amount that he's been able to collect over the campaign season, the truth is that Youngkin could still surprise everyone with a lot of money at the last minute. There's no prohibition on anything like that in Virginia.
So Youngkin and McAuliffe, though, are in sort of different positions when it comes to bringing in the big dogs. Youngkin early on had sort of aligned himself with President Trump. That didn't work in his favor, so he's really sort of backed away from it. On the other side, though, the big dogs are coming in for McAuliffe, right? Former President Obama is set to head to Virginia later on this week to campaign for him. Other top Democrats, including the First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, and Stacey Abrams as well, have already stumped for the former governor. Democrats are taking this race pretty seriously, it seems.
Well, and it makes sense for them to do that. A year ago, Joe Biden won the electoral votes in Virginia by 10 points. And so you're looking at a race right now that is maybe a 1 or 2 point race favoring one candidate or the other, depending on the polls that you look at. And with that kind of close race, you can see that there's a big gap between Democratic enthusiasm a year ago and Democratic enthusiasm right now. And so that reality has created a sense that all hands need to be on deck in Virginia. And so you're seeing all the key Democratic figures out there in this campaign, particularly looking at the suburbs. As you're looking at the suburbs around Washington, D.C. and around Richmond, you're seeing a lot of effort to try to build up that motivation to get the people who voted Democratic a year ago to come out again this year. On the Republican side, it's a bit more of a challenge because I think the Glenn Youngkin, the Republican candidate, has to walk kind of a tightrope. You have an ability to connect with Donald Trump. Donald Trump has endorsed Glenn Youngkin, but it seems to me that that the benefit of being connected to Trump gets has gotten him about as far as it's going to go. The more he talks about Trump at this stage, the more he may motivate Democrats to vote against him. So I really don't see a lot of benefit to Youngkin having Trump in Virginia. It's a state that Trump lost twice, and I don't see him benefiting from walking away from Trump either, because he needs both those people who are Republicans who don't like Trump and Republicans who do like Trump to show up to make this a Republican victory.
So when it comes to voters, Democratic voters, Republican voters, who's got the most fire kind of under them? Who really wants to make it there on Election Day? Can we tell?
Well, so far what we're looking at in Virginia is a system this year that has much more access to early voting and absentee voting. And so in the last few weeks, you've particularly seen some of the Democratic counties around Virginia ramp up their early voting numbers. Now, we don't register voters by party in Virginia, so we can't say that of the votes cast so far, so many were cast by registered Democrats or registered Republicans. But we can at least look at those counties where Democrats do well and those counties where Republicans do well and see a couple of things. One, of course, is that the Democratic numbers are up in those Democratic-leaning counties. But it's also true that the Republican numbers are up in the conservative, more conservative counties of the state. I think what's going on here is that Glenn Youngkin is not repeating Donald Trump's mistake. A year ago, Donald Trump tried to discourage his voters from voting early and voting absentee. Glenn Youngkin is doing exactly the opposite. He's telling all of his Republican supporters to vote now, get it done, have it worked out ahead of time. And Virginia has made it much easier for both sides to do that. So there's no doubt about it. This is very much a down to the wire race here in Virginia.
Are we giving it more weight than it deserves? It's kind of taken center stage nationally, or does it deserve that much weight?
Well, I think Virginia looks more like America than a lot of states. If you were to compare us to Maryland or West Virginia, or, for example, we definitely look more like the rest of the country. We have been a purple state pretty recently. The suggestion of the polls this year is that we may still be a purple state. The reality here, though, does have a few dynamics that have to do with just timing. The reality is that there is another governor's race this year, New Jersey, which you probably don't talk about that nearly as much as you talk about Virginia, because New Jersey has a much more democratic political orientation, much more overwhelmingly so. And so you end up with a dynamic where people are looking for early indications of how a president is doing. They want to see something about how well or how poorly he's doing. And the dynamic here oftentimes does correspond to what happens a year later. The last Republican governor of Virginia, Bob McDonnell, was elected in 2009, right after Barack Obama. And a year later, that was a very, very bad year for Democrats in Congress. You can look at the election of a Democrat in 2017, a year into the Trump presidency, and see a preview, if you will, of the difficult environment that Trump faced going forward in the midterm elections in the last 2 years of his presidency. So there is some measure, I think, of looking at Virginia as a leading political indicator that makes sense. But I do think that the media is looking for something a year into the Biden presidency, and they're going here. They're looking at this because this is one of the key events that we can look at a year into that presidency.
Yeah, we're always looking for some sort of crystal ball to give us the future. Stephen Farnsworth, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Later today, Glenn Youngkin, the Republican candidate in the Virginia governor's race, is holding a Get Out the Vote rally. You can stream that at around 12:30 p.m. Eastern by visiting cbsnews.com/election or by downloading the free CBS News